This week's reading selections focus on the literary movement of naturalism, and specifically we're going to look at a work by Jack London. So for this week's direct instruction, I'd like to give you some information about both naturalism and Jack London. We're going to start with some biography information about Jack London. He was born in San Francisco. His father was William Cheney, an astrologer, and his mother was Flora Wellman. People described her as a cold woman. She didn't take well to motherhood and was not very motherly towards him. He had a stepfather named John London, who was around for a while, but after his father died, but he was a poor farmer, so they lived in poverty for quite some time. After his father died, his mother was helped, and he was raised by a stepsister and a servant who he called Aunt Jenny. He went to work at 10 years old. He eventually quit school at the age of 15 and went to work full-time in a factory. He worked specifically at a salmon cannery. Because his home life wasn't as great as it could have been, he used books to escape life and to learn and experience the world outside of his home. After he quit school, he took several odd jobs, many of them related to the sea. He was an oyster pirate, he was on a fish patrol, and he was also a sailor on a whaling schooner. He returned to high school at the age of 19 and passed the entrance exam to the University of California at Berkeley. However, he only attended school for one semester. Coming from a poor family, he didn't have a lot of finances, and there wasn't the financial aid system in place that there is today, so he had no choice but to quit. During the gold rush, in the Klondike, he joined the gold rush to help support his mom. He was hoping to, obviously like everybody else, to strike it rich, but he had to return home because he became ill with scurvy, which is makes you weak, and it's due to a vitamin C deficiency. However, he gained a lot of ideas from his writing from these experiences in the Klondike. His political ideas were a little out there at times for the time. He was arrested for vagrancy in 1894, and he spent 1 month in jail. He was considered a socialist and fought for the poor. He wanted them to have the resources available to them so that they could better his lives. He also shared wealth. He never quit working regardless of his success, but he always worried about money, which is most likely a result of growing up in a poor family. Finally, as time went on, he was able to earn money as a writer. He published over 50 novels in his lifetime. He was also a letter writer and a public speaker. One of his most famous novels is Call of the Wild. And The Great Earthquake and Fire was written for Collier's magazine, and they paid him 25 cents a word for a 2,500-word article. This was a great deal of money for writing at this time. Once he became an adult, he eventually got married. He married Bessie May Madden April 7th, 1900, but they divorced just 5 years later. They had very different interests and weren't able to see eye to eye. I can assume, we don't know for sure, that they probably had a lot of discussion before getting divorced, because in the early 1900s, people did not get divorced. This would not have been a everyday occurrence. He did have 2 children, Joan, born January 15th, 1901, and Bess, born October 20th, 1902. A third child died at birth. And those are some pictures of his wife and his children. In 1905, he married a second time. He married Charmaine Kitteridge. They had adventures at sea together, and they built a large ranch in California. It seems that their interests were much more similar, and they were able to share their lives together. One of his biggest admonition was to write what you see, and that's what he did in his writing. He wrote from his own experiences. A little bit about naturalism. It is the literary category in which we put Jack London's work. It's a literary movement that took place from the 1880s to the 1940s. Obviously, those are rough estimates Nobody was like, oh, it's the end of the 1941, time to stop writing naturalism. But we're looking at that time span of period. It used detailed realism to suggest that social conditions, heredity, and environment shaped human character. So there was a lot that shaped who we were. It also sought to create a believable everyday reality. It was meant to be real life. Naturalism also exposed the dark harshness of life. Oftentimes, it would focus on things like poverty, racism, disease, corruption, things that weren't all that wonderful to write about or to read about, but they reflected what was going on in society, so people did read them. Naturalism normally has very particular characters. They're often ill-educated or lower class. Their lives are governed by the forces of heredity, instinct, and passion. And their attempts at exercising free will or choice are stopped by choices beyond their control. So they're not able to exercise free will effectively. The plot in naturalist writing is often not a full tale. These are what we would call like slice of life dramas. We're looking at one little snapshot of what's going on. They're often a chronicle of despair, meaning that they have very negative in nature. The conflict in naturalism writing is often man versus nature or man against himself. And the characters struggle to stay civilized despite the brute within. So they understand this. The characters are often struggling with this internal kind of conflict of trying to be more animalistic, and especially when we're dealing with survival. That pretty much sums up the information about Jack London in naturalism. For your assignment like this week, I would like you to list 5 things that you learned about Jack London from this presentation, and list 3 things that you learned about naturalism. As always, if you have any questions about this assignment or any other of our assignments for this week, please make sure that you contact me. Have a good week.